Okay, so like I said, good evening. I'm Rick Tate, Chairman of Pickens County GOP. We'll start off, as always, with a prayer. Elliot, would you be so kind?
Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the time that we can come out here tonight and learn more about Attorney General Wilson and his run for office. And I know that several have many questions that they're going to have for him tonight over everything that they've read over the last year. Just give us all wisdom as we choose candidates going into the June 12th primary. Be with all our elected officials. Give them wisdom as they make decisions in office and represent the wishes of their constituency. And thank you for this food, and bless it to our bodies. In Jesus' name, amen.
Would you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would like to recognize some of the folks in the audience tonight. David Cox, candidate for South Carolina State House District 5 here in Easley. And one of his competitors, also candidate for District 5, Alan Quinn. And my officers here in the Pickens County GOP, I couldn't do this stuff without you. John is our treasurer, but he is also our IT guy. We couldn't do this live streaming and put this stuff up on YouTube without John. And the studious guy over there taking copious notes is Steve Haney, who is our secretary, which the title suits what you do. I mean, you're really good at it. If you need to know anything about local party rules or anything technical, Steve is the guy to go to. He can tell you. And I'm not going to stand up here and run my mouth all evening. You folks came to see the Attorney General of South Carolina. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. The 51st Attorney General of South Carolina has been in office, I believe, since 2011. Is that right? And replaced a gentleman who had been in, how long had he been in? 8. He had been in 8 before you? Oh, okay. Anyway, my mistake. At any rate, the Attorney General of South Carolina, Alan Wilson.
Can y'all hear? Oh, there we go. Hey. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see some new faces. So I want to thank all of you for coming out in this weather. You guys could have been anywhere tonight, and you chose to be here. It's been a busy week for me. I started off in Greenville, left Columbia Monday morning, went to Greenville, went to 2 events, came and then went to Horry County that same night, came back to Columbia. The next morning, woke up, came back to Greenville for 2 events, then drove to Darlington. And now today I was up in Greenville, Oconee, now Pickens, now back to Columbia. Tomorrow I will be in Myrtle Beach and then back in Spartanburg tomorrow night. That's my week. So my kids are like, Daddy, will you please try to be home as early as possible? And I said, I'm going to rush out of here after this event is over, but I'm honored to be here tonight, and I appreciate y'all giving me the opportunity during this election season. I've always maintained that the offices that these officials are running for and these candidates that you see, the offices that we run for are not our offices. They belong to you. They belong to the people of South Carolina. We are the mere trustees of these offices, and so I am asking you to allow me to continue being the trustee. But before I talk about what I do, which is your Attorney General, I'll talk about a little bit of who I am. I married a girl from New Jersey who was coming through South Carolina. We have 2 children. Michael, our son, is 10. Anna Grace, our daughter, is 8. I have been in the National Guard for 22 years. A lot of that comes from how I was brought up. I have 3 other brothers who are all serving in the military. All of us have served on active duty. All of us have served overseas. I'm now in my 22nd year of military service as a colonel in the National Guard. My 3 brothers and I are all Eagle Scouts. And I tell you that more or less to brag on my mother and maybe a little bit of my father, because you know how hard it is to wrangle 4 boys. But public service runs deep in our family, and that is kind of what led me into the life that I'm currently serving in right now. That's a little about who I am as a father and a husband and a soldier. But now I'm the state attorney general, and that's about what I do. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I do or what I've done. A lot of people, when they run for office, they say, vote for me because of what I'm going to do. Well, I believe past behavior is predictive of future outcomes. Since I've been elected attorney general, I have sued Barack Obama more than 50 times, our former president. I was the first Attorney General to successfully defend our state voter identification laws. These were getting struck down by the Obama Justice Department left and right. I was the first Attorney General to successfully lead the effort to defend those laws. I was one of 8 Attorneys General back in 2011 and 12 who led the 26-state challenge to Obamacare. That obviously we went to the Supreme Court, lost that case, but now I'm one of 20 AGs who's bringing another lawsuit to challenge Obamacare. As many of you know, the Trump tax cuts went into effect back in December, and that removed the penalty from Obamacare, and that was the one thing that Chief Justice Roberts hung his entire position on in upholding it. And now that that is gone, we believe we've got a very good chance at having Obamacare overturned in the Supreme Court. So we're currently part of that lawsuit. I was one of 2 other attorneys general. Me and 2 other AGs brought a lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of Dodd-Frank. For people who don't know what Dodd-Frank is, it's the Obamacare of the financial services sector. You know, it's an attempt to concentrate power in unelected bureaucrats ruling through administrative fiat in the federal government. And that's what it was. It created, this law, Dodd-Frank, created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mick Mulvaney is now trying to wrangle. This is an agency that has monolithic, unchecked, unbridled, unaccounted for power in the government, and it's not even the president can remove the person that's running it. So it is a very powerful agency that is basically jacking up the cost of financial services, and that is being borne by the consumers, and it's driving capital out of our country. I was a member of a group of attorneys general who brought more than a dozen lawsuits against the EPA. One of the most notable lawsuits, and I think one of the ones that almost everybody in this room can relate to, is the lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the waters of the U.S. Waters of the U.S., as all of you know, a water of the U.S. would be like the Mississippi River. It's an interstate navigable waterway. The folks at the EPA under the Obama administration tried to rewrite the water of the U.S. rule to include water ditches and drainage ditches and low-lying wetlands that could, get wet a couple of weeks out of the year. And they wanted to define those as waters of the U.S. so that now you would have to go to the federal government to get permission to develop your own private property, even if it wasn't an interstate waterway. Well, we challenged that and we won, and we had that rule struck down. Another instance in which a bureaucrat tried to pass a law without going through Congress was the case against the U.S. Department of Education. A couple of years ago, a bureaucrat in the Department of Education went to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and went to the definition where the rule that says you don't discriminate based on age, race, sex, etc. Under the definition of sex, they changed the definition. Now, an unelected, this wasn't Congress, they took the federal law and they included under the definition of sex transgender. And then what they said is, states, if you don't allow transgender students to go to opposite-sex bathrooms, showers, locker facilities, we're going to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars in Title IX funding from your states. Well, my issue and the issue with the other states that joined the suit had nothing to do with the transgender students. We believe that those children should be addressed and accommodated at the local school level. Our issue was a separation of powers. A bureaucrat in the executive branch of government cannot rewrite federal law and then have it implemented as if it was passed by Congress and then threaten to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars from the states. We got that rule enjoined. It was rolled back after President Trump took office. So these are examples when the state attorneys general have actually been extremely effective in fighting the ever-encroaching federal government. We have brought dozens and dozens of lawsuits challenging many of the things that President Obama tried to do during his tenure. Many of you remember the president made a comment about, I don't need Congress, I have a phone and I have a pen. And this is in relation to his illegal executive amnesty order that he wrote a couple of years ago when he tried to rewrite federal immigration law through an executive order. Well, we filed a lawsuit. This was the Daca order, if you remember. We filed a lawsuit challenging that, and we won. The court said, Mr. President, you have to faithfully execute the laws under the Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. You just can't unilaterally rewrite federal law. We won that one. This month, we have joined the Daca Lawsuit, which does not seek to remove children, but it seeks to stop the federal government from unlawfully implementing a plan that Congress has not yet passed into law. And last month, we joined Another lawsuit challenging the sanctuary cities law that California is imposing, because we believe that if they're successful there, sanctuary cities will sweep the country. California can't write its own federal immigration policy or ignore federal immigration law by having sanctuary cities. We're currently litigating that at this time. We have been extremely involved over the last 7 years in defending religious liberty. Many of you have heard of the company Hobby Lobby, right? Hobby Lobby is a privately owned corporation. These are people who are devout in their faith, devout Christians, and devoutly committed to practicing those views. Well, under Obamacare, their company was going to be required to provide abortifacient services. This was deeply offensive to them. They did not want to provide these services and pay for these services, and they were going to be forced to. Well, that case went to the United States Supreme Court. We joined in the defense of Hobby Lobby, and in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court upheld that they do have rights as a private company, and they don't have to provide those services. Another case, you may have heard of the Barber case in Mississippi, or maybe it was Arlene's Flower case in Washington State, or Masterpiece Cake Baker, which is a Colorado state case. These are states that passed laws that would require people or prohibit people from discriminating against same-sex couples. Well, I don't believe in discrimination against anybody, period. I don't care what your background is. But these laws had another consequence to them. People who were baking cakes, like the Masterpiece Cake Baker, Jack Phillips, or Arlene's Flowers over in Washington State, didn't have a problem providing services to same-sex couples, but couples would come in and want to have these services provided for a religious ceremony like a wedding. They didn't have a problem providing the services. They just didn't want their God-given talents to be utilized for something that violated their conscience, their religious conscience. Well, that case is now before the U.S. Supreme Court. We have joined in an amicus brief in support of the religious rights of people to exercise their religious views in the exercise of their day-to-day job. And that is something that we stand firmly behind. There are a number of cases that our office has been involved with in defense of the sanctity of life. North Carolina passed a law that outlawed abortion after 20 weeks. It was challenged by Planned Parenthood. We joined in the lawsuit to defend North Carolina's law. Alabama passed a law, as did Texas, outlawing the abhorrent practice of dismemberment abortions. I don't know if you know what a dismemberment abortion is, but quite frankly, it's you abort a fetus by cutting it up in utero and pulling out one piece at a time. Now, I have a very strong position on being pro-life and no abortions, but when states are seeking to pass laws that push back on these types of practices, we're going to defend those states' rights to do that. We join in that. We join in an Indiana lawsuit that protected or prohibited abortions based on age, race, disability, aborting a child specifically for that. We're currently involved in that. There was a state in the New England area, I believe it was Maine, that passed a law saying that a pro-life person cannot stand in front of an abortion clinic on a public sidewalk and advocate against that abortion clinic because it might impede someone's access to health services. And that's why I'm running for Attorney General. I love being the Attorney General. I love the men and women of the office. I love the mission of the office, and I think I'm good at it. And so on June the 12th, there's going to be a distinct choice for you all to make. And I'm here today to say to you that I would like to continue being the trustee of the Office of Attorney General. It is your office. It is not mine. You have to give it back to me. And I'm here to ask you for that opportunity one more time. I'd be honored to have your consideration and your vote. So at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Here you go, Alex. Alex, 12 years on the school board here in Pickens County.
Hey, Alex.
Thank you. In 2013, our school board was challenged by the Freedom from Religion organization about the prayer. And ultimately, we won, and we're now allowed to start our meeting. Of course, we can start our meeting with a prayer, and we can do it according to the conscience of our beliefs.
Right.
Your office was very instrumental in helping us do that. I was the chairman at the time, and we asked for 2 opinions specifically, and you wrote them both. And having studied those opinions and studied, cases like Chambers, as well as Greece, New York, and things like that.
Town of Greece, yeah.
Yeah, we were able to actually win that ultimately. And I want to thank you for doing that. That's the reason I'm going to vote for you.
Thank you.
When you didn't need my vote, you actually helped, and that made a big difference. What was amazing to me was how liberal the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has gotten in the last 10 years or so. Do you agree with that, and do you see that's going to improve over the next 4 years?
I saw the two individuals who were nominated for the Fourth Circuit by President Trump, and I know one I know him pretty well, and I believe him to be a fairly strong conservative. The other one I've worked very closely with. He's in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I know he was a law clerk for late Chief Justice Rehnquist in the U.S. Supreme Court, and he has a very strong, strict constructionist view of the Constitution, and that's Jay Richardson, and I think both he and Quattlebaum will be great additions to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I couldn't be happier with President Trump. Listen, this is what I say to people all the time. You can say what you want about President Trump, but I've been incredibly proud of the choices he is making to put on not just the Supreme Court, thank God for Neil Gorsuch, but for all courts. We've been running into brick walls for the last 7 years, or 6 years leading up until President Trump's election. In the case you talked about, Town of Greece v. Galloway was a major case. It was one vote away from them outlawing public prayer in a public body, like the school board you served on. And one of the things I'm really proud of is the brief that we filed in support of those folks was actually cited and quoted by the late Justice Antonin Scalia in upholding public prayer. And so this is a position that our office is stood strong on, and it's one that I'm very proud of. And so I appreciate that, Alex, for recognizing that and remembering that case.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
Negative always seems to be popular in campaigns, I guess because it works to one degree or another. And as much as I hate to ask you this, corruption. People have tried to associate you with the Quinn and the Quinn machine, as they call it, and the corruption charge gets thrown at you a lot. So I'd love for you to take that head on. And
when you don't have a record to run on, when you have a liberal record to run on or no record to run on, the only thing you can do is scream, yell, and pound the desk. There's an old saying: when you have bad law, pound the desk. When you have when you have bad law, pound the desk. When you have bad facts, make sure I get this right. When you have bad law, you pound the desk. When you have bad facts, you pound the law. When you have bad of each, you just pound the desk all over the place. And that's what they're doing. They're pounding the desk because they don't have good law. They don't have good facts. In this case, they don't have good facts. They are basically making allegations that are categorically and demonstrably false about my record as Attorney General. It's guilt by association. One of the things that one of my opponents has said is he's accused me, not just me, but members of my office, of trying to impede an investigation, which is wrong. And I'll tell you why. We're the ones that appointed the special prosecutor 8 months after this alleged attempt to impede it. So it's impossible. His timeline doesn't make sense. Our office fought a very hostile situation back in 2014 when we were dealing with the former Speaker of the House. And we handed this case off at the appropriate time so that it could be handled by someone else. But when they say that we tried to impede an investigation, it's because they don't understand the facts. They've said horrible things about our office. Just last month, one of my opponents said that between 2015 and 2016, the Attorney General's office did not prosecute any cases in the grand jury, except maybe one in 2016. That was not true. He was basing that on outdated information. When we provided that information in a rebuttal reply online, they called us a liar. If you go to the clerk of the state grand jury, you'll find that between 2015 and 2016, we prosecuted 184 defendants just in the grand jury alone. When you go to the General Prosecution Division, we prosecuted nearly 1,400 people, or 1,400 cases rather, that same 2-year period, because he didn't know where to look. I use that to illustrate this. He had bad facts, and he's using bad facts to make untruthful allegations. And I believe that he's doing this because he does not have a record to run on.
Then you would say that guilt by association with the Quinns is totally unfounded.
Well, first off, I knew them. They were my consultants. That doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make anyone a bad person. Again, when you don't have a record to run on, you attack other people's record. In my situation, I asked people to take the case so that I wouldn't have to make a decision on it. That's what a prosecutor does when they want to avoid the appearance of a conflict, and that's what we did, and that's what happened.
Thank you for the answer.
Yes, sir.
Another one. Stacy, one of our pet peeves is closing primaries. And I guess one of the better arguments to me for closed primaries is that constitutionally we have the right of freedom of association. And we have a right to have a private organization and to restrict it to those people that are part of, that share our goals and our ideology, and to keep people out who disagree with that and picking the people to represent us in an election. In other words, Republican primaries are for Republican voters and Republican candidates. And when you cross over, it's actually dishonest to begin with. But legally, where do you stand on that? And you know, I told you this a while ago. I've always been mystified how the state government took over a private organization and tells us what we can do and what we can't.
Well, I'm for closed primaries. Okay, I'm not opposed to closed primaries. I had a discussion with a gentleman right before this began, and he had a very strong opinion, and I'll talk about it. When I came into office, it was during the first year, the Solicitor General received an opinion request. Actually, it wasn't an opinion request, it was a lawsuit that we joined in because we were asked to opine on whether or not an open primary was constitutional or not. My personal view is this. My job is to uphold the rule of law and defend the Constitution. There is such a thing as a bad law or a bad policy that is otherwise constitutional. So we were asked, is the open primary system, is it lawful? And the answer is, yes, it's lawful. I mean, jacking up taxes 90% is lawful. The General Assembly can do that. I think it's horrible. It shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean it's good, but doesn't mean it's unconstitutional. They have the right, because they're the people's elected representatives, they have the right to pass a primary system that is closed. That is open. So we took the position that the open primary is constitutional. So is the closed primary. I prefer the closed primary. But the position that we took was you got to follow the rule of law, and sometimes you have to say that the law allows the government to do things that you don't ultimately agree with from a policy standpoint. And that's the position we took about 6 years ago.
Anybody else have a question? Go ahead.
All right, and I just like to first ask, who believes that that we have a right for Republicans to run closed primaries? I certainly do. Most people here do. What I would ask is, what you're saying is that your office took the position and defended the open primary laws, meaning that you believe that we do not have a constitutional right to close primaries, that you believe that South Carolina Republicans do not have a constitutional right to exclude Democrats, to exclude, to exclude anyone that's not a Republican. And that's, and in the Miller case in Virginia, it was found that the forced open primary was unconstitutional. In South Carolina, the state imposes a different standard on political organizations to anyone else as far as our corporate governance. It takes a supermajority to change over to a nomination by convention system, and so we're being treated differently than other organizations. I just want to confirm that you believe that open primaries are constitutional.
Yes, open primaries are constitutional. But here's, like I said, just because I say that something is constitutional doesn't mean that I endorse it or that I think it's the thing that we should do. Frankly, I would love to see them close the primaries. But the courts have already upheld that they're constitutional and lawful. You could have a jungle primary. You could have a convention. The mechanism by which they do that, I don't like that mechanism. But we do have a constitutional right to a closed primary if we elect the representatives and they pass the law. We have a constitutional right to lower taxes. You just have to pass lower taxes through the legislative process and get it signed into law by the governor. So that's my position.
So going forward, if another challenge...
Here, he's going to bring you the microphone.
So going forward, if another challenge to open primaries comes up, we could expect your office to oppose that.
I'm
To
sorry.
oppose, if another lawsuit comes up challenging closed primaries as unconstitutional, your office would again defend the open primary laws as constitutional.
I can defend something as constitutional, but be against it as a matter of policy.
Sure.
And that's what I've said. I don't like the open primary system, but let's look at the history. The Republican Party was born out of the open primary system. We reaped the benefits of the open primary system when we weren't a majority party, historically speaking. And now that we're a majority party, people don't like it because they feel like they're being raided, and they probably are being raided. But again, I support a closed primary system, and I will defend a closed primary system if it was passed. I would vehemently defend it. But the open primary system, good or bad as a policy, is not unlawful. That's all we're saying. It's not illegal. The General Assembly can pass it. Any other? Right here?
Well, recently, personhood got defeated in the legislature, but the opponents kept saying, oh, this is going to get us into a lawsuit, we're going to lose. Do you have any opinions on that? Would you be willing to stand up for personhood if it should get a challenge in the courts?
I was at the press conference where I publicly committed to defend it if it had been passed.
I just have, this is totally out, but you were talking about our, the prison system and all that. Do you ever see it going back to being an actual prison system where they are prisoners and they're in there not to be pampered, but to be punished for things they've done?
I mean, I don't know how to answer that question, only to say that I hope so. I know that our system needs a lot of reform, I mean, across the board. I know that the current director of the Department of Corrections is a great guy. He's a good friend of mine. He used to be one of my deputy AGs before Governor Haley appointed him over there. I know that he's been fighting and yelling for years about putting jammer towers on top of the prison systems that would jam the cell phone signals so that we don't have these lead correctional issues. Drones are coming in and dropping phones. Phones are being smuggled in through various sources. And if we just jammed them, all that would go away. The pay of the correctional officers is abysmal. I mean, and again, we got to pay SROs in the schools. You got to pay teachers. I know you got to prioritize, but when you got someone making $28,000, $29,000, $30,000 a year feeding a family of four, and some guy says, I will give you $2,000 if you will go ahead and smuggle things in, a person who's desperate to feed their kids, and I'm not saying that all correctional officers are like this, but I'm saying the temptation is going to be there, and it's going to be something to be exploited. And so these are things that we've got to consider. These people are protecting the worst of the worst in society, and they're going in there every day in the prisons without weapons, and they're having to monitor these folks, and we pay them nothing.
Along that same vein,
Yes, sir.
how would you handle the problem with executing death row inmates?
I would like to see them give us an option beyond what we've got. Right now, the way the law is written, if they can choose between lethal injection or electrocution. If one is not available, let me back up a little bit. If they don't choose execution, if they don't choose electrocution, the only thing that's left is lethal injection. You can't get the drugs for lethal injection because the pharmaceutical companies don't want to be boycotted for giving the drugs to South Carolina. We can't get the drugs in the United States to execute people through lethal injection. So if I'm sentenced to death, I'm going to choose I'm going to choose the one that isn't available. Yeah.
One of the
Just let them raid Grandma's cabinet.
One of the, I believe I'm right on this, one of the candidates for governor, I believe, has come out in favor of the firing squad. Yes, so
Listen,
what do you think of that?
I'd be fine with it.
Fair enough. Presley Stutz, president of the Greenville Tea Party, chairman of the Greenville Tea Party, president. Which title do you prefer, President? Either one, huh? Either or. Anyway, he brings to mind another subject, something he's been heavily involved in, and Stacy again, involved in for a long time. Give us whatever thoughts you may have on the Greenville Hospital System decision and the controversy going back and forth and the William Timmons bill and all the controversy surrounding the whole subject, legally especially, from a legal point of view.
So I know this is under litigation. I hear rumors that they're trying to settle it, obviously, since that law was put in the General Assembly. But what I can tell you, this is what I know about it. We were asked recently to give an opinion, and the opinion was related to whether or not the General Assembly could ratify the transfer of all the private or the public assets from GHS to a holding company. So at GHS, these are the facts. Greenville Hospital System is a publicly created entity created by the General Assembly with public assets. They created a private parent holding company. They transferred all the assets to this private parent company, and that upset a lot of people because they were concerned that now there's no transparency and there's a shield from how taxpayer dollars are being spent. A bill was put into the General Assembly that ratified that. And the question was asked to us, can the General Assembly ratify a publicly created entity transferring its assets to a privately created entity? And the opinion basically said, and again, this is kind of like the closed open primary discussion, we're not endorsing this. The opinion said the General Assembly has the power to create an entity. It has the power to authorize that entity to transfer its assets. And that's what the opinion basically said by the Solicitor General section. When I ask people who are on the other side of this issue, why would they create a private entity? You know, why do you need to create a private entity? And I don't know enough to know whether this is a good idea or bad. I do know this much. I have a big concern about public assets going to a private organization, and I'm concerned about that. But what they would say is that the Constitution prohibits public-private ventures, and so the hospital system created the private entity so that it could then go into other ventures with other hospital systems around the state. I'm not endorsing that. I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea. That's just the other side of the argument. I've also been told, and this may not be sufficient, and I don't know. I don't have enough facts to know if this is good or not. But the Greenville Hospital Board, which is appointed by the delegation, still has oversight over this private entity that was created. Some people, and there's some in this room, I'm looking out the corner of my eye right now, said they dispute that. and they may be right, but I'm just giving you both arguments that I've heard. The only point of the law that we have opined on is does the General Assembly have the authority to authorize that act? And they do. Whether you like it or not, it's power that they have.
And lastly, for me, I may think of something else, but I don't. This, as far as I know, this is the last question I have on my mind. This is totally in your wheelhouse. Judges in this state. We were talking earlier about the lack of a separation of powers under South Carolina government. The legislature holds all the power, and you deal with the judicial branch. I mean, that's your job. Almost. I mean, you can define it almost as just dealing with the judicial branch. Judicial branch. So how would you envision reform in state government to give us a better judicial system? Or are you happy with the judicial system the way it is? Does it need reforming? And if so, how would you do it?
Government should have 5 attributes to it. It should be responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, and stable. The last 2 are really byproducts of the first 3. It's not the government's job to create profitability, but it can create the conditions in the private sector for profitability and stability. Good tax policies, lower regulations, then that creates stability in the economy, et cetera. But those first 3 prongs are where I want to dial into the judicial issue. The third prong is accountability, that there should be 3 equal branches of government holding each other accountable in a check and balance system. Right now, there are 2 states in the country that elect judges the way that we do, us obviously, and the state of Virginia. 48 states do it differently. Now, a number of those states do it by public elections. I am not advocating that. But a number of states do it similar to the federal model, which means where the president makes a nomination and then the legislative branch does a confirmation. I believe that, well, let me back up a second. The way judges are elected, a vacancy occurs on the bench, okay? So you got to fill that. How do we fill it? There's an entity called the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. It is comprised of 10 people. 5 of those people are appointed by the Speaker of the House. 3 of those people are appointed by the Judicial Chairman of the Senate, and 2 by the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So 3 powerful elected officials appoint all 10 of these people, and 6 of the 10 are actually sitting members of the General Assembly. So when a vacancy occurs in the judiciary, The legislative branch controls the vetting, the nominating, and the election of the judicial candidate. So 50 people may apply for an opening. The Judicial Merit Selection Commission issues out 3 people they deem as qualified, and they nominate 3 out, and those 3 people then run before the General Assembly, and then 1 gets on the bench. Who writes the budget and approves the budget for the judiciary? The legislative branch. Now, the governor has the veto. We all get that, but we know how easily vetoes are overcome. I believe that you have more accountability when you place it with someone that you can blame. Who do you blame for a bad judiciary right now? In the federal level, you can go to the president, because the president is the one that picks the person, and it's accountable because you can go to one person. Right now, we have 170 members of the legislative branch. If you have bad judiciary, and I'll tell you what happens. So, I mean, most delegations are deferential to the people who, in other words, the Greenville delegation is not going to go in and monkey with the Florence or the Horry County or the Beaufort County or the Jasper County delegation's nominee. And so a lot of this is regional, and it's basically chosen by the various delegations. And there are a lot of good people in the General Assembly. This is not to impugn them, but I just think it's not a very transparent way. I don't know who to blame when we get bad judicial decisions, because the way we elect the judges, there's no one person to point to. I would like to see a system in which the governor is directly involved, because you could hold one person accountable more than you can hold 170.
It's kind of like our road system. You don't know who to blame for the road because there's so many commissioners and committees, and when everybody's in charge, no one's in charge.
Look at our education system. Responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, stable, my 5 attributes. I don't know who to hold accountable for the education system, because if you go to the superintendent of education, who I like very much, she's going to probably say, well, you need to go to the State Board of Education. I don't even have a vote on the State Board of Education. They're 18 people. They control the curriculum. They control policies on education. So you go to the State Board of Education. They're going to say, whoa, wait a second. General Assembly appoints us, and they have these education committees. You go to the education committees. They say, well, go to the governor. The governor says, don't go to me. Go to the 86 school districts and superintendents. And they say, well, wait a second. Y'all elect the statewide superintendent. I'm not saying it happens that way, but what I'm saying is that our education system is everybody's got some power and influence, but no one's accountable with it. Same with the judiciary. Same with the transportation department. Powers everywhere. Boards and commissions abound. So who do you blame? And it's a system that is born out of an archaic constitution. And I think that we need to reform it and create a little bit more transparency and make people and positions a little bit more accountable.
Elliot?
Earlier this year, there was talk about rewriting the South Carolina Constitution. Would you weigh in on that? Pros and cons, or just your opinion?
Well, there are always pros and cons. I believe our Constitution, I forget how many pages it is, but it's extremely long compared to the U.S. 80 pages. Our U.S. Constitution's only, 7 pages, 6, 7 pages long, and that's for the whole country. Our Constitution was written in 1895, okay? And it was during a time when we had just come out of Reconstruction. And there was a view that people did never want it. There was a very strong executive during the Reconstruction era, and it was
Tillman Constitution.
The Tillman. That's right. Pittsburgh Ben Tillman presided over this Constitution, and we all know what a rosy guy that was, right? He was a horrible person. Advocated the open lynching of African Americans, and that's the kind of person we were dealing with.
I believe it's, not to interrupt, but I believe it's in the minutes of the Constitutional Convention that he actually took the power out of the governor's office and put it in legislature because they were afraid a minority would become governor and have power.
God forbid a Yankee or a black guy ever be governor again, right? Or an Indian woman or a woman or anyone that didn't look like them. And they dispersed that power amongst themselves. And of course, we've all heard of, in history there have been thatches of power in the General Assembly, the Barnwell Five. We've heard of these little groups that come up at different decades. But it's very easy to have all that power. Now listen, I know a lot of people in the General Assembly, not all of them. This is the system they've inherited, and I'm not going to blame them for being in the positions they are. But I do think we have got to own this thing. And your question about should we look at the 1895 Tillman Constitution, the answer is I think that we do. I think that we do need to get up under the hood. The downside to that is that anytime we open up the hood to something, we always risk having people making it worse. And so I always qualify my support of going at that Constitution with the idea that government always has a way of making things worse when they get up under it.
I won't argue with that point. If there's no other questions, closing remarks, and
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Yes, sir. I want to thank y'all. Some of you have asked some really tough questions, good questions. I hope I've answered them to your satisfaction. Alex, I appreciate your comments and your remembering of that case. Listen, I'm your employee, folks. You're my boss, and I'm not a perfect person. There is no such thing as a perfect person. But I've hired a bunch of wonderful men and women that are rule of law, strict constructionists, originalists. They are hardcore on prosecuting bad guys. I've empowered them to go after thugs, gangbangers, predators, traffickers, unruly bureaucrats, corruption, everything that you can think of. I love serving as your Attorney General, and I love being their boss, and I want to continue doing it for another 4 years. The office of the Attorney General belongs to you, not me. I'm here today to say I would like to have your vote on June the 12th, and there's several ways you can help me. Not everybody here has the ability to write a big fat check, but all of you have the ability to give me a $1,500 contribution tonight without taking a single dollar out of your bank account. I was reading on the internet a couple of years ago that a study was done that if you take a bumper sticker and you drive around, I don't know if it was a month or 2 months, but you drive around with it for a couple of months, the number of people that will see this thing has the equivalent value of $1,500, the number of impressions. So you can give me a $1,500 contribution by putting this sticker on your decal. Now, this was written on the internet, so we know it must be true, right? So that is one way you can help. A yard sign. You can take a yard sign and you can put it in your yard or in front of your business. And here's the thing. Sometimes these venues are great because we can skim the surface of a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues I just can't go into enough detail in the time that we have allotted. Any of you want to sit down and talk to me, half the people in this room have my cell phone already. I don't mind sitting down and having a cup of coffee with you. I don't mind being open to you because, again, you're my boss. So if you want to get with me after this event or you want to reach out to us, please give me a call. I'd love to sit down with you. I'd love to get to know whatever issues are important to you. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to address the GOP meeting tonight. Thank you, and God bless you all.
We thank you for taking the time to come here and talk to us and answer the questions. And all of you, and a while ago when I was thanking our officers in the county GOP, I forgot Daniel, our cameraman. He's always here, always dependable, and always does anything we ask him to do, and I appreciate it. And all of you other folks that came out. Wouldn't be any point to doing this without you folks. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking the questions and your interest. There's only one thing worse than not voting, and that's an uninformed vote. If you don't take the time to know who you're voting for and what you're voting for, it's a waste of time, and you're probably going to do yourself and your neighbor a disservice. So please vote. And remember, you've got to register to vote or change your registration by, I believe, this Saturday? Sunday. By Sunday, to be eligible to vote on June the 12th. So if you need to register or if you need to change your registration, if you've moved, go take care of that before Sunday so you can participate in the primary on the 12th. Thank you for all coming out. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your meal.